Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Creation Myths. I just want to preface this video by saying, I know, just, I know, but hear me out. What I'm going to show you today is a conversation I had recently, as of July 2026, with Rebecca on her channel Examining Origins, where she does these Prove Evolution streams. I jumped in at the end, and we spent about half an hour talking about the mitochondrial time to most recent common ancestor, which creationists claim is 6 to 7,000 years ago, and actual biology shows is 100 to 200,000 years ago, with the most recent estimates being about 60,000 years ago, or about 10 times outside of the young Earth creationist range. Now, I am on the record with my opinion that Rebecca is a bad faith actor. I think she pretty clearly has a double standard where she will credulously accept any old thing from creationists. Any inane talking point, she'll be like, great point. But refuses to accept clearly strong evidence supporting evolutionary theory. Like very clear, here's a prediction, here's the confirmation. No, that doesn't count for whatever reason. She also, as we will see in the clip I'm about to show you, assumes biologists use specific data in order to reach a desired conclusion. For example, she'll say things like, you use the substitution rate instead of the mutation rate because it gets you a longer time to most recent common ancestor, ignoring the reasons why the techniques are done the way they are, and that she agrees with those reasons. Now, this is not a Rebecca thing. A lot of creationists do this, and I think at least part of it is projection, since they start with a conclusion that they cannot change, and they backfill the rationale, so they think real scientists must be doing the same thing. So why in the world am I subjecting myself to this? I've said this before, but I think it's important to push back against misinformation however you can and provide accurate information for people in the audience who are receptive to it. Rebecca is not receptive to it, but that's not the point. I fully accept that I am never going to convince her of anything, and that's okay. Because some of the people watching might hear what I'm saying. And conversations like this are opportunities to learn accurate information about biology and evolution, and learn about the dishonest and manipulative tactics creationists use to make their arguments. Because pointing out those tactics is a critical thing you have to do in conversations like these. It's not enough to treat this as a conversation about the science. You also have to point out the way creationists will manipulate the conversation and manipulate what you are saying to either make you look wrong or to make you look dishonest or to make it appear that what you're saying is supportive of their conclusions. So you have to point out those tactics and those tricks when they are utilized, and you'll see that in this conversation. And the last thing is that I think it's worth showing just the level of denial that's required to make these young Earth arguments. Young Earth creationists have to twist themselves into knots to avoid the obvious conclusions. So when you have a conversation and lay it out step by step and watch the creation say, yes, I agree, yes, wait a minute, no, right at the end of that chain of logic, I think that has value. So check this out, and after we're done, we're going to come back and we're going to look at some of the comments on the original video on examining origins. I think some of those comments were really interesting in terms of what they reveal about how creationists are trying to process these arguments. So here's the conversation, enjoy this, and then we're going to come back and talk about a few related things.
Hey, Dr. Dan, you're on.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. So I know you've been going a while. I don't know when you started, but it was significantly earlier.
Yeah, it's almost 2 hours, so maybe if we can like spend 15 minutes or less.
Let's be real quick. I've been doing a lot of reading and thinking about mitochondrial DNA lately. So what I want to put forward for you is just a real quick how we know that mitochondrial DNA necessarily indicates an older consistent timeline to the mitochondrial most recent common ancestor rather than a recent mitochondrial most recent common ancestor. There's a bunch of ways that we know this, but we can just do one really fast if that sounds good to you.
Sounds good.
Let's do it. Okay. So just broadly speaking, overall, when you look at a multicellular organism, there are two kind of buckets we can put mutations in, right? There are somatic mutations and there are germline mutations, right? So somatic mutations is most of your body, and then germline are the reproductive cells, right? And the somatic mutations, those can never be passed on to offspring, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so your skin cells, your muscles, your brain, all those mutations can never get passed on, right?
Correct.
The studies that young Earth creationists will cite to get you to a recent mitochondrial most recent common ancestor, those studies are pedigree studies. Yeah, they're Parsons, Ding, there's a whole bunch. But these are pedigree studies where you look at parent, you look at child, you count the differences, that's a pedigree, you calculate the mutation rate, right? That's I know we've talked about this before. I want to make sure we're on the same page, but that's how these things work. So specifically, those studies and the two main ones that you see from young Earth creationists, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the ones that you typically see from like I'll say the professional young Earth creationists, it's the Parsons study from like I forget the year, 97, I think it was. And then there's the Ding 2015 one, which is the one that Nathaniel Jeanson uses. Those all look at parent to child transmission events in terms of the mutation rate. They look at a parent, they look at the child, it's the mother necessarily because it's mitochondria, and they look at the child and they count the differences up, and that's the single generation mutation rate, right? Are we on the same page there? That's how they do it.
Yes.
Yeah, and then they take that, and this is like Jeanson, this is just textbook Jeanson. You take that single generation rate and you put that backwards linearly in time, and you can calculate, okay, it's this many mutations per generation, we need to account for this many total, so just do the math, and it's X number of generations in the past is your most recent common ancestor. Yeah?
That's generally, yeah.
Okay. And so those studies, they represent single transmission events, right? Parent to offspring. That's a single transmission event. You have a kid, there's differences, those are the mutations. Now, in those studies, the samples that they're taking, those are either blood samples or cheek swab samples, where you do this and you sample sequence the DNA, and right? Blood cells and cheek cells are somatic cells. They're not germline cells, right?
Yes.
So if we're counting the mutations in the blood cells and the cheek cells, those mutations can't be transmitted to offspring, right?
Right.
Right. So those mutations are not relevant to mutations that are going to build up over time because they can't be transmitted, right? Okay. Which means that if you're going to take, for example, the Parsons study from 1997, the one that we always hear about, the one that, the FBI, uses the mutation rate, whatever, where they actually say in the paper that if you take this rate at face value, you get a mitochondrial most recent common ancestor like 6,500 years ago. You can't do that because those mutations don't actually get transmitted, right?
Well, I'm not sure. Like, I mean, I agree with you that generally somatic cells they're not going to get,
not generally, mutations are, absolutely.
Somatic mutations are not going to get transmitted, right?
Okay.
But I don't know what their reasoning is for why they're doing that, right? Like, these aren't creationist papers.
Right.
Would you agree? Okay, so did Parsons have a reason? And I mean, it's not limited to Parsons, right? I have a whole stack here of, mutation
there's a bunch. Yeah. And my point is, these are either I think entirely they're blood cells or they're cheek swab samples. Those are the types of sampling that they're doing in these pedigree mutation rate studies. Yes?
Right. So are you contesting? Yes. Are you contesting the findings of the papers?
Nope. I'm contesting
Okay.
the utility of extrapolating those findings back in time because those mutations cannot be inherited if they are somatic, which blood cells and cheek cells are somatic.
Okay. Have you written any letters to the editors of about these papers that are
That's
being
irrelevant
used?
because the authors are not doing what creationists do with the numbers.
So are but the authors are looking, the reason they're doing it is to see what the mutation rate is,
Right,
correct?
they're looking at the mutation
Okay.
rate, not calculating the time to most recent common ancestor. It's creationists that take those numbers and misuse them to calculate the
Okay.
time to most recent common ancestor. Yeah.
So Parsons didn't do most recent common ancestor?
They
He
said if you
specifically
take
did.
our numbers and do it,
Yes.
this is the number you would get, but that's
Right.
wrong for XYZ reasons.
Right. I mean,
Right.
of course,
Thank you.
because he's an evolutionist, right? So he's
No.
not going to agree with most
Nope.
recent common ancestor being
See,
6,000 years.
that's where I get frustrated because we just went through the logic of why you can't
Okay.
do that and you agreed with every step, didn't you?
But
Hang on,
I'm
just can you just you agreed with all the stuff I said, right?
I'm agreeing with your logic sounds
Thank you.
good. But the
Great.
part I'm not agreeing with is I don't know why these papers, the secular papers, are using that methodology if it's wrong for calculating the current mutation rate.
I can
I'm
tell
not
you.
saying extrapolated. I'm saying why haven't you written any letters to the editor complaining about their methodology?
I can
Okay.
tell you. It's
Go ahead.
because what you just said was wrong. It's you said why haven't you written any letters explaining why their methodology is wrong for calculating the mutation rate? The answer is it's not. What the problem is when people take that single generation mutation rate, which we agree overcounts mutations because it includes somatic mutations, and extrapolate it back in time as though those mutations can be inherited. Now, the authors are not doing that, right? Parsons doesn't do that. They say, here's the number you would get, and that's silly for all these reasons. Ding doesn't do that. And a bunch of years ago, when David Neff actually emailed Ding, the author of that 2015 paper, and said, did you remove the somatic mutations? His answer was no, right? So the papers, I think, are generally fine because they're reporting the single generation mutation rate. The problem comes, so there's no reason for me to like email the editors and say like, hey, this paper is wrong, right? It is what it is, it's fine. The problem is in the misuse of those numbers because you're taking somatic mutations, which we agree can't be inherited, and extrapolating that rate backwards in time infinitely to the most recent common ancestor, right? That's the problem. Now, the biologists writing these papers aren't doing that, right? Nathaniel Jeanson is doing that. But like, I can't write a letter to Answers Research Journal because you can't get published in that journal unless you sign their statement of faith, right? So I can't do that. So that's the answer to your question.
Okay, great. Now, how does that help evolution? Because this stream is not about complaints about what creationists are doing with research. It's about what makes evolution true. Where's the evidence for
I'm
evolution?
so happy you asked because the flip side of that coin is the evidence for evolution because you're a young Earth creationist, and we've talked about this before, right? You're in the young Earth creationist camp, right? And so if I'm providing evidence that the mitochondrial most recent common ancestor existed 60,000, 100,000, 200,000 years ago in the past, that's evidence for evolution in contrast
You
to young
haven't
Earth creation.
provided that evidence, though. You've told
I'm sorry,
me
say that.
how
Sorry, I
we
didn't hear you
should-
when you said that.
You haven't provided evidence.
Oh, I just did, and we agreed that you can't use those rates to calculate the time to most recent common ancestor. That's the evidence.
Okay, so what you're doing is you're taking an argument against an argument that young Earth creationists are using, right?
Yes.
But how is that evidence for your theory? Yeah, where is your mutation rate? How are you calculating that? Where's your actual beef? Where's your meat? Rather than just complaining about a methodology that creationists are using.
So I have two answers for you, but before I get to them, I just want to make sure we're on the same page. You agree with everything I've said in terms of the consequence of using somatic mutations and the inappropriateness of extrapolating somatic mutation rates back into the past, right? We agree on that?
Okay, I'm agreeing with the somatic mutations are not getting passed on in the
Great.
germline. Okay.
So
But
therefore, we
I
can't use that
well,
rate in the past, right?
that I don't know about, and I've learned my lesson with you that I need to fact check you. Okay. So
So wait,
it's
are you calling me a
possible that
liar?
you're
When did I
right.
lie to you?
I didn't say you're a liar. I'm
That's what it
saying
sounded
you
like. What have I
no,
said to
I'm
you
not
that's
saying
wrong?
you're a liar. I'm saying that a lot of things that you present as this is true, this is true, turn out not to be true. I'm not
So
saying you're
give me an
lying.
example, because I really try hard to not say things that aren't true, and I've
Okay.
actually got several videos on my channel of like correcting myself when people have pointed it out. So please give me
Okay,
an
well,
example of
I've
something I've said to
already
you that's wrong.
look, there is a video that we did together on my channel that I have talked to you extensively about. I've tried to show you how you're wrong. Other people have even taken up your arguments and tried to show you how you're wrong. And we still haven't been able to get you to admit it. Okay. And I would prefer not to hash the entire thing out right there, but you're asking me for where am I getting the idea that I have to, look into what you're saying. And that's one of the instances where I have to look into what you're saying. And another one is your video about blood on, you did a video on blood types and how, there's no room for like the blood types, the variation, the alleles, the number of alleles that we have,
Oh, the created
right?
heterozygosity video and the
Okay.
recombination rate.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Those
So
numbers are
that
well documented. Yeah.
okay, well that turned out to be a
Well,
problem
well,
because
the
you didn't
main well,
account for
well, let's talk
mutations.
about that for a minute then, Rebecca, because the two numbers that are relevant there are the number of alleles. Actually, it's three numbers. It's the number of alleles that exist currently. It's the number of alleles that could exist at creation, which is four, which we agree on.
Right?
And then it's the average recombination rate, which is one crossover per chromosome per arm per chromosome per meiosis. Those are the only relevant numbers there, and none of them are wrong.
Okay, so are you saying we know the mutation rate?
No, that's irrelevant. Mutation is rate
Okay,
is irrelevant to that question.
but it is not irrelevant to the thing because I asked you, are you calculating it considering mutations? And you said no.
Yeah, because I was showing that the creationist argument is wrong, and that comes from Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson, where he said over 99% of the diversity is due to recombination, not mutations. So if you want to take my numbers and adjust them by 1%, feel free to account for mutations.
Okay, well, anyway, I
Anyway,
don't know. I don't have, I don't, this has been probably a year ago that I watched the video, so I would have to go back and see. But the whole point is that, you asked, do I think you're lying? No, I don't think you're lying. That would be very foolish, with your profession and everything to come on and specifically lie. But do I think you're wrong about things? Yes, and quite a few things. So, I mean, I'm not calling you a liar. I'm just saying
okay,
even very smart people, even very educated people can be very wrong.
okay.
So,
So
yeah.
let me just before we go. So I said there were two answers to your question. I want to get to that. I just want to kind of recenter us before we do that real quick. We agree that somatic mutations can't get passed on, and we agree that single generation pedigree studies capture somatic mutations in their data. Right? We agree on that.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great. And the thing that you're not willing to agree on is that therefore we cannot extrapolate that single generation rate backwards in time, right?
Okay, let me say this. I think there are a lot of factors that can affect mutation rates over time and that those need to be accounted for. And they could affect them in either way, ways that could be beneficial to creationists, ways that could be beneficial to evolutionists, right? So we can suggest different factors that could affect mutation rates over time. So do I think it's a mistake to extrapolate over time, large amounts of time, and assume that a mutation rate is constant? I do think that's a mistake.
Great.
Where
Thank you.
I'm not where I'm not sure about what you're saying is I'm not sure what's going on with these papers and why these authors are thinking, because a lot of what they're doing is trying to calculate mutation rates. right?
Which is different from substitution rate, which is different from time to
Okay.
most recent common ancestor. These are three different
Okay.
things that I think are all getting conflated here. And calculating the mutation rate is very different from calculating when the mitochondrial most recent common ancestor existed, right? Those are different things. They're different
Okay.
calculations.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And that's
Right.
why these authors are doing what they're doing. They're looking at things like, for example, mitochondrial diseases in Amish populations and the mutation rates and the rate of these diseases. Like that's literally something that one of these papers deals with. The time to most recent common ancestor is irrelevant to that question.
Right. And so, but the point is that I don't know why they're using somatic mutations and why they're okay with that.
I just explained it.
All you're doing is saying they're not using it for most recent common ancestor.
Right.
And I agree that that is not what they're using it
Because they're
for.
looking at mitochondrial diversity within a family. Yeah.
Okay.
That's what they're doing.
So, but the point is, you aren't offering evidence for evolution.
And that was the second
thing. Okay. So,
Got you covered.
Okay, what is your evidence for evolution?
So the evidence for evolution is the correct way to do these techniques, which I know calibration is a dirty word in creationist circles, but what you do is you calibrate the rate of mutation accumulation based on past ancestors that are anchored at a known point in time, right? So instead of looking at common ancestry with chimps, for example, which I know that's a no-no, you can't assume evolution to prove evolution, right? Forget that. We can just look at things where we know when they happened in time. So we know, for example, when the island of Tristan da Cunha was settled, right? We know when that happened in time. That's not something we have to debate, right? It was like 1820 or 1816 or whatever it was, right? We know when that happened. We know when, I forget the relative's name, but it was Richard III of England. It was like his sister or aunt or whoever it was. I forget her name. I forget who it was. I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to remember this person's name in the 1400s, but we know when this person existed and we know when they had kids, right? Like this is a royal family with like a documented history, right? We know when these things happened. I don't think anyone's debating like when these historical events happen. We know when, for example, Iceland was settled, or Madagascar, or the Canary Islands, or Vanuatu, the Norfolk Islands, right? We have a bunch of these examples where we know when this thing happened in history, right? We can agree on those events.
Yes, but is this going to get to evidence for evolution in the next 5 minutes?
Yes, I'm getting there. It takes a minute,
ready
right?
to close it out.
Yeah, so what we do is we know when the common ancestor existed, and we can look at the mutation accumulation since that common ancestor, right? We can look at since the 1400s, how many mutations? We can look at since the 1800s, how many mutations? We can look at since, Iceland, 1,000 years ago, how many mutations, right? So we don't have to infer a rate of mutation accumulation. We can directly measure it over decades and centuries based on events with known points in the past, where we know when that common ancestor existed, right? That's a thing we can do.
Yes, and I know you love that Tristan da Cunha example because it fits the evolutionary rate.
Well, I love it because it does the math correctly, and the fact that it fits the evolutionary rate is the cherry on top, but the real draw is the correct methodology. So my point here, well, hang on, because it's not just the Tristan da Cunha one. There's a bunch I just mentioned. Norfolk Islands, Richard III, there's a bunch. And when you look at the mutation accumulation rate over time, what you're doing is you're necessarily looking at mutations that occur in the germline. They're heritable, right? Because you're looking over many generations, right?
Yes.
So they have to be heritable mutations.
Okay, so...
Right, well, hang on, do they have to be heritable to occur over,
Yes, but are they...
Yeah, easy.
What are they doing different in those tests? What are they testing different? And so you're saying they're not testing the somatic mutation?
Yeah, because when you look over multiple generations, you weed out somatic mutations because you lose all of them in the transmission, right? You lose all of those in the multiple events, right? So if you go back 300 years, the differences you can document in the descendants from that common ancestor, those differences necessarily have to be germline differences because they've accumulated over many generations. So any somatic mutations that happened in there are gone. So they have
You're
to be
just
germline.
destroying your argument from earlier because your complaint was they're using blood, they're using things that are somatic
And
mutations.
over one generation, exactly.
Okay.
Right.
But even the Parsons paper is not over one generation.
It is. There's a
right?
single
And
event where it's a triplet,
okay,
where it's grandmother, mother, daughter. There's a single Amish triplet in that paper. All the rest are just mother, child. And even in the triplet example, they actually measured from grandmother to mother and then mother to daughter. They did it on a single generation basis. So no, the Parsons paper doesn't do what I'm saying.
okay, how about the Helgeson paper?
That's a Y. The Helgeson 2015. That's a Y chromosome paper. That's not mitochondrial DNA.
Hold on, let me see.
Anyway, my point is these are multi-generation studies which weed out somatic mutations, because a mutation in the, so I can't read, it's too small, I can't read it.
Okay, it's Helgeson 2024 mitochondrial DNA. So
there's no
Helgeson.
Helgeson's not the first author on that paper. Helgeson's
you're
the
right,
last
it's Arna
author.
de Tour. It's Arna de Tour.
There you
the
go.
last time I told you Arna de Tour, you said, I don't recognize that name. And then you said later, oh, the Helgeson paper.
Yeah, because
So
we switched to Y
Helgeson
chromosomes. Yeah.
Okay.
It was,
I chose Helgeson this time because I know it's the name you recognize.
well, it's you always name papers by the first author in the year. So if you say Helgeson, I'm going to go to the 2015 Y chromosome paper. Anyway, it doesn't matter which paper you pick, as long as it's surveying with a known ancestor more than one generation in the past. That's good, because you're weeding out the somatic mutations. Do you understand that that's the case, right? You can weed out the somatic mutations by doing multi-generation. Great. Now, the key thing is when you do this, when you look at the rate of accumulation in the multi-generation pedigree studies, which, to be clear, are directly documented, directly observed. There's no assumptions here. We know the time in the past. When you do that and you do the take the rate and calculate it backwards in the past, you get the old Earth timeline. The minimum number you get on the lowest end of the confidence interval is 60,000 years ago, 10 times beyond the young Earth timeline. These are directly observed. These are directly observed rates of mutation accumulation that allow you to account for the existing divergence by weeding out somatic mutations, which we agree can't be transmitted, so you have to do that. And when you do that, you get a number at a minimum of 60,000 years ago, and the consensus range is 150 to 200,000 years ago. And that's the evidence for evolution.
Okay. And let me just say that I agree that those papers you picked that's the numbers they would show. Okay. I'm agreeing to your papers.
Thank you.
But my complaint is that you are cherry picking, because there's a whole bunch of other ones that are not based on one lineage, like this paper. Okay. If you can see, you can see the lines. It is not just one generation. Okay.
And so what's the mutation rate in there?
It'll take me a minute to look, because I don't have these memorized. Okay. It's been quite a long time since I looked at this. But
it's like one mutation per 30 generations, give or take?
It probably, yeah.
Okay. So
okay, it looks like, wait, hold on. I'll try to find a quick number for you, but go on.
I think it's about 1 per 30. It's like 30 something. It's one mutation per 30 something generations, if I remember that one correctly. Right. And let me just do some quick math here, because you have 120 mitochondrial differences in the two most different humans from each other. Right. We can just measure that. So if we have 120 differences, right? I'm doing math on my phone right now. 120 differences times 30 mutations per, or 30 generations per difference, right? One mutation every 30 generations. Okay. Times, what do you want to use for generation time? You want to go with 20 years?
It doesn't matter.
Let's go with 20. It's probably, the average historically is probably slightly above that, because you have to account for child mortality, but let's go with 20 years.
I'm not worried about it either way. Give them
20. So 120 differences times 30 generations per difference, times 20 mutations, or 20 years per generation. And then we're going to divide that by 2, because you have to do each lineage, right? You have to, like, you can have, if you have 120 differences, you could have 60 of them here, 60 of them here. So you divide that number by 2, and you get 36,000 years, 6 times the young Earth timeline.
Okay, you think that this is a bust because you
Yep.
think I'm absolutely like, okay, let me ask you this. So because you're still not showing evidence for evolution. Yeah, I'm fine with that number. Actually,
So
I think
as a young Earth creationist, hang on, I want to be clear about this. As a young Earth creationist, you're okay with mitochondrial Eve existing 36,000 years ago. You're good with that?
No, I'm not. No,
okay, because that's the
I'm not
paper
okay
you
with
just
that.
cited.
I'm not okay with that. But
Okay.
remember, earlier you were saying we can't extrapolate back into the past. But
I
now
know, because it actually slows it down. Yeah,
Okay,
there's reasons it
because-
actually slows more than that. You're right. But it's
No.
not for the reason you want. Yeah.
Well, we can find reasons to slow it down and reasons to speed it up. But what I
Okay.
would say is 36,000, it does not fit the evolutionary timeline, right?
Yeah, it does. It's within it's in the same order of magnitude. Yeah, it does actually. That's fine.
36,000. Okay, so when are you saying our most recent common ancestor was?
The most recent common ancestor is 60 to 200,000 years ago. And if you do part of the math, right, if you ignore purifying selection, which we haven't even talked about, you get 36,000 years. Now, purifying selection is going to slow that down even more, right? Because purifying selection reduces diversity, right?
This. I'm not going to.
You don't agree with that? You don't think?
I'm not going to have a long argument about this because we've already said mutation rates can alter, right?
Okay. I haven't said that. Have you?
Yes, I have. And you
said
I
haven't.
that
No.
You said we can't extrapolate it back into the past.
Yeah,
so
mutation rates, the rate at which the differences occur is approximately constant. The rate at which they build up, the probability of fixation of a particular mutation declines over time. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you end up with a curve where young mutations are more likely to be present and old mutations are more likely to be lost. Yeah, that's different from the mutation rate changes over time.
Okay, look, and I want to close it out because, look, I've been going for more than 2 hours now. It's 2 hours and 20 minutes. But I just want to say, for me, like 36,000 is pretty close to the young Earth timeline.
It's 6 times the young Earth timeline.
Okay, and it's also about 6 times the evolutionary timeline.
Nope.
I know you're.
Nope. It's not. It's like 65% of the Earth, of the old Earth, right? It's it's way closer.
I thought okay. Well, anyway, I'd have to look into that more, but I do think that what we would expect, right, is like for the evolutionary timeline, we would expect 1 mutation every 600 generations, right?
No, you're conflating mutation and substitution rate. Those are different things.
Okay.
So when you use your pedigree studies to calculate the mutation rate, you get mutations fairly rapidly. But the rate at which those mutations will achieve fixation in a given lineage is a lot slower due to factors like the strong purifying selection in the mitochondrial DNA. So so that's the difference, is that we can directly observe a rapid rate of mutation occurrence, and we could also at the same time directly observe a very slow rate of mutation accumulation. Those two things are not in conflict with each other, and it's not that the rate changes over time, it's simply measuring two different things.
Okay, well, the argument that I'm sure you're aware of is that in some areas of the mitochondrial DNA, the substitution rate equals the mutation rate.
That is wrong because the mitochondrial DNA is non-recombining because it's a haploid circular chromosome. It's non-recombining. Right?
But the substitution rate is the mutation rate.
No, it's not.
Okay.
No, it's not.
Well, and maybe we should just agree to disagree on that. And honestly, I mean, you may think you're making a strong argument here. For me, I don't have a problem when I see the number 36,000.
That's amazing to me. That's great. If you want to acknowledge that the time to most recent common ancestor for mitochondrial Eve is 36,000 years,
I didn't acknowledge that. No, I did not acknowledge that.
If you don't have a problem with that, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Okay. And you don't have a problem with that number for your
No, because that
evolutionary
number
timeline?
is not accounting for selection, which is further going to drag it into the
Okay.
past, right?
Because no matter what you find, no matter what numbers you find, you'll find a reason that it's okay,
Well, are
right?
you disputing that selection occurs on the mitochondrial DNA?
I'm not disputing that selection occurs.
Okay, great. Thank you.
But what I'm saying is no matter what we see, you'll find a way to make it fit the evolutionary timeline.
Then you
So,
should have no problem pointing out something I've said that's wrong.
okay, well, and I maybe I will, maybe I will take the time to look into it, but for me right now, you have not offered evidence for evolution. And my purpose is not really focused on defending young earth creation. It's what I believe. It's a story I believe. I think there's good evidence for it. I do acknowledge that there are challenges to young earth creation. So I'm fine with 36,000 years being a
Awesome.
challenge, right? But
Awesome.
it doesn't help the evolutionary story, right?
If you
So
say so.
thank you for coming on, Dr.
Thanks for
Dan.
having me.
I'm going to take a few comments from viewers and then I'll turn it off. So,
Okay, so I think that pretty much speaks for itself. I don't feel like I have to add anything to that conversation, but there were a ton of comments on this video, and I want to go through just a few of them because they're even more astonishing than what we just saw in terms of the arguments being made and actually crack open the door to the possibility that what we're seeing here is a greater level of misunderstanding than I had ever considered. So first, check this out. We have a user named Depleted Urbanium who says, the rate is just multiplied by what you are trying to explain, and I don't know what that's supposed to mean. They continued, if you claim the rate is inflated because it includes somatic mutations, but should only be calculated on germline mutations, then you also don't have to explain said somatic mutations with the resulting rate. And again, I have no idea what the point is. Like, when I read that, I don't know what that's supposed to mean, and reading it right now, I can't see any point that's being made there. But they continue. To put that in specific terms, if you imagine the somatic cells mutate 100 times faster than germline cells, I don't know why you would do that, but okay, but there are only 16 average pairwise differences between the mitochondrial DNA of two random humans. The average doesn't matter. What matters is the maximum divergence of about 120, because we're calculating the time to most recent common ancestor for the universal common ancestor for mitochondrial DNA. So what matters is the maximum, not the average. And the average is like 20 something, it's not 16, but whatever. Again, I still don't know the point. How many of those is he, that's me, now claiming are due to somatic mutations? Now how much diversity exists to calculate an age? None. See the problem? And it's at that point that I didn't yet, when I was commenting on this, get what the argument was, but reading it back, I can now see what I realized later, right? Now I get how this user's trying to make this argument. They're saying that if somatic cells mutate faster, which they don't, but that's what they're saying, then you have to remove from the number of differences you have to consider when calculating the time to most recent common ancestor, a bunch of mutations that are theoretically somatic mutations. Now, I didn't get that at the time because I responded by saying, I legit don't understand what you're saying. But now, having gone back and read it and read the subsequent comments, now I understand that they're saying of those 120 maximum differences, if you're saying there are somatic mutations in there, which I'm not saying, then you have to remove those, and then having to consider the smaller universe of mutations allows for a most recent common ancestor. So that's the argument that's being made here. And I just want to say, creationist, speak clearly, write clearly. I shouldn't have to launder your arguments for you to get them to make sense, because that paragraph was incoherent, and I shouldn't have to read it 8 times to extract the barest semblance of a coherent argument out of it. But the argument that's being made here is that, oh, if you're going to say there's a bunch of somatic mutations, then you need to account for that in your math, evolutionist, and that's going to bring the number closer to the present. Now, I've explained at length why that's not the case. But let's continue here. Rebecca chimed in, and you can imagine how productive this is going to be. She said, Dr. Dan, the point is not about the rate. I mean, it is. The rate of mutation accumulation is the entire point here, but she continues. The point is that if you're saying we can't use the mutations we count because a lot of them are somatic mutations, you're actually making your situation worse. So she gets what this other user is saying and is piggybacking on that. Now, I'm not saying you have to take into account somatic mutations when you're looking at the maximum divergence, for reasons I will explain in a minute. But what Rebecca is saying is you have to reduce that number because you have to account for somatic mutations. You have to remove them from your calculation. So she goes on, that means the mtDNA genetic diversity in humans is even lower, which would be even harder to explain for evolution and fit nicely with a recent Eve. So she's basically saying that the 120 is too high. Right now I get the argument, saying we have to remove some of the mutations from those 120 maximum differences because they're somatic, right? I don't even know what I'm supposed to say in response to that because I have explained this to Rebecca several times. But let's continue because she elaborated in a later comment. She said, he, the original user, is saying your argument is problematic because if you remove a bunch of cited mutational differences between humans, and it was that phrase that made it click for me, what she's saying here, then the problem for evolution gets worse than it already is. I love how they think there's a problem for evolution here. You'll have to explain why there are even less mtDNA differences between humans since you're dismissing many of those mutations as somatic differences that won't get passed on. So what Rebecca and others are doing here is failing to see the difference between the mutations you document in a pedigree study, many of which are going to be somatic, and therefore you need to filter those out when you're calculating time to most recent common ancestor, and the mutations that differ between the two most divergent mitochondrial genomes among all of humanity, right? Depleted Urbanium and Rebecca think that we have to filter out some of that divergence due to somatic mutations. What they apparently don't realize, despite me explaining this to Rebecca multiple times, is that by looking at divergence between people with common ancestors in the distant past, you're already weeding out somatic mutations. It's not like all or even most or even an appreciable fraction of those mutations just happened. They've been inherited over many generations, which means they originally occurred in a germline at some point in the past. So you don't have somatic mutations in there, which means you don't reduce that number. I have no idea how they aren't getting this at this point. But like I said, this does open the door to a shocking level of not comprehending what the actual techniques are, what the argument for a distant mitochondrial most recent common ancestor is. It is possible that we're not looking at dishonesty here. We are looking at just a genuinely shocking level of not understanding any of this. I'm open to that being the case. Now, the cherry on top of all of this misunderstanding is Rebecca's inevitable accusation of dishonesty from actual scientists. She wrote, "It's hard to even keep straight all the flip-flopping and date changing you guys do to try to accommodate the data. Is the most recent common ancestor now 60,000 years, like you said last night? I thought the latest was it had to be 300,000 years ago. I guess it depends on what you're trying to prove at the moment." Now, what am I even supposed to say to that? Calmly explain, again, that we've calculated a range from 60 to 200,000 years for the time to mitochondrial most recent common ancestor, and also that she's confusing the mitochondrial and Y chromosome numbers. The Y chromosome, if you recall, the time to most recent common ancestor is 200 to 300,000 years ago, in contrast to the mitochondrial DNA, 60 to 200, with the consensus like 100 to 200,000 years ago. Does any of that matter? She's not going to hear it anyway, right? I could say it again, in one ear, out the other. And that's putting aside the accusations of fraud, which that one overloads the irony meter, let's say, considering creationists here are citing Nathaniel Jeanson, among others, to make their arguments on this issue. So I don't have anything else to say about this. I just hope people come away from this with a clear understanding of the problem that somatic mutations pose for the creationist calculations on this issue, and also the level of denial and dishonesty involved in making the young Earth argument here. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Rebecca is bad. She's a bad faith actor. I think she's operating dishonestly. But in this information environment, you have to be willing to put up with bad behavior to spread good information for the receptive members of the audience. So that's what I'm trying to do here. And probably what I will continue to try to do, no matter how frustrating it is. Thanks for watching. Please remember to hit the like button before you go, leave a comment, subscribe if you're not a subscriber, share the video, and if you want early access to my pre-recorded videos, consider becoming a channel member. Thanks again for watching, and don't get fooled.